time. So I just wanted you to know, we were contacted about using the listserv. We said no. The logo and name was used without our authorization. There's likely going to be a story about it. It's frustrating, but it's outside of our control. And when we learned about it, we addressed it. Any questions on that front? I just wanted to get that out of the way before anybody saw an article on it. Okay. Here's what we need to accomplish over the next hour and 40 or so minutes. The next item on the agenda was membership dues, but Mayor Kafusi and I chatted. We're going to shift the agenda because we've invited Steve Waldrop to join us again for a check-in on the Governor's First Home Initiative and just the overall discussion at the Capitol, give you a chance to interact with him, and he has to be back to the Capitol in a few minutes. So we're going to move the conversation with Steve Waldrop to this point, and then we do need to have the discussion around our next steps in the housing space. Great discussion with the legislative preview earlier today. Got some good feedback from the members who were in the room for that. And then we do have membership dues for you to consider. You have the option of adopting those today or waiting until March. But we told you in December we'd bring them to you today so we can discuss them. You can consider them and then make the decision if you want to adopt dues now or wait until the March meeting. So those are the two big ticket items. We've got some Slido questions for you in the housing advocacy space that we'll get to after we have a chance to hear from Steve again. So Steve, thank you to the governor for joining us today. What probably makes the most sense is maybe if you want to go sit next to Seth and we can, Councilor Dugan, can you hand down that mic so that folks online can hear Steve? We'll turn the time over to you for a moment.
Well, thank you again. It's great to see you all again. I see you guys on a semi-regular basis. To see you all the time now. I'm back to school. Thought I escaped, but you know, the guilty never really can go free. So I'm just going to talk very, very briefly, and then I just want to open up for questions in the time that we have here. There's a lot of discussion about the various proposals that are out there, and everything from a statewide, overlay zone with minimum density all the way to, a selective implementation based on kind of NIHP principles and a lot in between. At last count, there were 37 bills around housing already filed before the session started. That number is going to increase. There will be a lot around housing. And let me just have Henry raise his hand back there. Henry Fred is a fellow with the governor's office, is interning with me for the next 6 months. So I don't just have him for the session, I have him for the next 6 months. He will be coordinating a Google Doc that will show all of the housing related legislation, and we'll get that to Cam and just Cam, you just post it out for everybody. The intent is that anybody can look and say what's going on in housing and have hyperlinks to click on the actual legislation. We'll just try to keep an updated current list because it's going to be very, very fast and very, very curious. There's going to be changes coming. We'll try to do something that allows all of our, everybody with a stake in this to be able to figure out what's going on and when and how. And of course, you can get directly with me, you can call Henry. Happy to talk to any of you and all of you all the time. It's my whole life.
Speak on that real quick then. So you're saying you're putting together a document that's kind of a bill tracker just on the housing bills?
Just on housing.
That we will have access to?
Yeah, it'll be a Google Doc. We're working through, making sure we got the technical stuff so we can share it. I think we can share it from the governor, from the Gov site. If we can't, I'll just do it in my own name, but I'll get it to Cam by the end of the week and we'll be able to have that available for everybody because there will be a lot of bills out there. We'll just try to have a short summary on each of them and then a link to the actual legislation. You guys heard the governor today. The thing the reason I took this job, there's two reasons I took this job. One, I really like Governor Cox. And two, I really did hope that he was as he portrayed himself. And in the limited time I've been able to spend with him, but much more than I did as a legislator, he's everything that he proves. He is who he is. And that's been very comforting to me because I understand the sincerity that he brings to the messages that he delivers. We've all been around people in the political sphere who will say and do anything to get their agenda met, and you learn pretty quickly who those people are. He is not one of them. Hopefully you guys know I'm not one of them. My whole goal is to do something meaningful. If I know if I asked you by raise of hand who thinks we have a housing crisis in this state, everybody's hand would go up. I already know the answer to that. We have a housing crisis. Nationwide, we have a housing crisis. But I really truly believe that Utah is uniquely situated to create things that other people can't and won't. And that really comes down to the people in this room. Because this is where the rubber hits the road. You guys are dealing with citizens. You guys are dealing with local decision making. The legislature has over, last whatever, how long we've been a state, 100 and some years, whatever it is.
128,
What's that?
128.
128. Empowered cities and counties to make land use decisions. That began with Brigham Young. You remember Brigham Young came and he drew a map. And that map was the very first zoning plan ever in the state of Utah. And it was very specific and very clear. If you ever go back, you want to go back and look at his map, it's very specific about where things would go and what things were compatible. And that is the charge that we put on our cities and towns, is to make sure that we're doing things intelligently, that we're promoting the life, liberty, and happiness of our people. And so now what's happened over time, obviously, is we are a land constrained state by and large. The majority of our population lives between one side of a bobsled track and the other side of a bobsled track. And we're trying to fit everybody in between those two sides. And that's where we have a challenge now, is how do we fit more people in between those two sides? And then also, how do we start pushing out intelligently? And that's I guess the front and back of my job, is to figure out how to do that. And it won't happen without you. I guarantee it. I look back and my good friend Ray Ward did HB 82, where we did ADUs, and it hasn't moved the needle on ADUs. And I believe that the reason it hasn't is because there wasn't consensus around that policy. It did not create what we hoped it would create, which was opportunity for people to do things intelligently within their community structures. So it's not, so it hasn't worked. We have a very good example of what happens when things get beaten through with a big sledgehammer. When I was in the legislature and working on housing stuff, many of you were in the meetings, and I remember very clearly the very first meeting. Somebody asked me, what's your goal? What do you want to do? And I said, I don't know. You tell me. You guys are the experts. You tell me what I want to do. And I'm taking that same approach now. There are proposals out there, a lot of different proposals. A problem we have to solve. And I really believe that we can solve it. And so as we see all of these proposals, my goal and hope is that you guys will come together and say, you know what, here's the best set of solutions for these problems, because we have issues with greenfield development that are very different than our built out cities where we have infill decisions to make. We have places where infrastructure is a struggle. We have places where infrastructure is abundant. We have to solve toward those issues as they exist in the places where they exist. So that's it. I mean, it's not any more complicated for me than that. We have problems. You guys are on the ground. You know what your cities have and need and want to do. We know we have a problem. We have to come up with solutions, or else we will continue to export our most precious resource, which is our children. And just by way of statistics, I know we talk a lot about how many entitled units do we have, Cam?
190,000.
190,000. Last year, well, let me go back. 2021, 37,000 housing starts. 2022, 30,000 housing starts. 2023, 20,000 housing starts. 2024, projected at much less than 20,000 housing starts. Our replacement level for housing is 27.9 according to the latest legislative audit. It's somewhere in there. right? I mean, 27,000, who knows how to come up with that number? I mean, but we know we're short. And if interest rates go down again, which they probably will, you're gonna see another flood of buyers in the market chasing limited supply. That is our reality. And so we have to create additional supply. I think the state's biggest focus and primary focus, matching what the governor said, is on first homes and on ownership. Because that gives our communities what they want and need, which is permanent, secure residents that are gonna promote the right solutions instead of creating more problems. Density is much better with ownership than it is without ownership. So to me, that sort of wraps around everything that we need to do is ownership and first homes. And some communities are already doing a lot of that. Some communities aren't. We want to, anyways, that's what I see as sort of the primary focus around what we decide is it has to hone in on ownership and not cheap homes, but affordable homes for our middle class. And that is really what we're talking about. In our country, when you grew up, you knew where the teachers lived. They lived in your community. You knew they owned a home, they had a family, they grew up there, they grew alongside you. We knew where our firefighters live, our police officers, they all owned homes. That is becoming increasingly rare because our wages aren't keeping up with our house prices. And what I just told you is our house prices are going to go up again. They will, absent some other intervening factor. So we have to increase our supply over the next several years, or we are going to continue to face exodus of our young workers, places like Austin, Texas, and we lose our good talent because they're smart enough to realize where they can build a life and equity, and then they'll come back later probably with cash, and then they'll raise up the price of housing again, because that's what happens. About 25% of the people that come back are boomerangs, and they come back with cash from Chicago or California or wherever they've been and made their money. And we need to sort of cut that and make sure that we're getting our most talented people to stay. All right, I've talked way longer than I intended, but questions, comments, thoughts?
I think we're off base. I think we're so far off base that we're looking at the wrong problem.
Okay.
And I say that because once again, we go back to 190,000 entitled lots out there. Plus over 190,000 entitled lots. The builders would build them if the demand was there. The demand is not there. So to say we're going to build 190,000, we're going to force this, we're going to build a different level of home. Rates are not at a point where people are moving. And until people move, they're not. And until you free up those starter homes that are already out there, and from a city that has an abundance of starter homes, they're not moving. Well, that's been the cycle historically, is that group of people move. That creates our first-time home buyers,
Right.
or our starter homes. It adds those back into the market. And right now, those folks aren't moving. I can tell you, any builder I've spoken to, man, if they had 100,000 people coming to them saying, we need a house, they'd be building them. But they build to demand. And so if they're building, 23,000 and then 19,000, and we're going to be less, it's because nobody is going to them saying, we need to buy a house. So to say we're going to flood the market with starter homes, which is where the governor's going with that, well, the starter homes are, but again, coming out of college, that's why I sent up the message to him today to Justin to ask him what that starter home is. And he's thinking 300,000. Well, I spoke to builders this week that said, if we build what he's asking for, we're going to build blight. We will 100% bake blight into this state, because that's all that's going to be able to happen. We can't build quality at 300,000. We barely build at 300,000. We can't build quality. So we are building blight. Well, that's the last thing we want as a state, is to have those types of communities. The last thing I want as a mayor is to take what's available land or in Provo and go in and say, hey, look, you know what, let's just take this excess land and we'll make tiny lots and we'll put these little houses on them and build blight into a city. Well, if the problem is rate, which is when our problems really started, house prices were going like this and we were still buying homes left and right. We couldn't keep up with the market because we had multiple offers on every single house we were selling. We were selling them for more than they were asking for. And then rates hit. And when rates snapped and we went up, the market stopped. And so to say, our problem is we don't have enough homes, we've hit the wrong market then. I mean, we've hit the wrong problem altogether. Because that's not what stopped. It wasn't, oh, we just quit building. We were building, builders were building exactly what the market wanted. They weren't building starter homes because that's not what people wanted. They were building regular homes. The problem is, as soon as rates went up, those people that were moving into those regular homes and buying them stopped buying them. Builders have, for the first time in a long while, spec homes sitting. So to go to a builder and say, build more homes, it is the wrong thing to say to them because they've got homes sitting right now that they can't sell. They're just sitting on the market and they're trying to find a way to market them. They're trying to find a way to cut costs on those homes that they have right now, so they can get them into that 450 that will at least give their buyers some sort of incentive from the state, and they're not doing it. They're still not moving. If demand isn't there, you can't, increasing supply doesn't help. And I think that's, so we're attacking this from the wrong angle. If we want to attack something, drop rates. Find a way to get, buy down rates, do whatever we need to do to say, look, let's get people moving again, because if they're not moving, it doesn't matter what we build. We can build all the homes we want to, and it's not gonna matter.
Do you think that, and again, I think back historically at, go back to the post-World War II generation, where you had somewhat similar, where you had a lot of people coming into the market that were first-time home buyers. And what was produced in that era were smaller homes. Those are we've got them there. I mean, we've got them on all of our legacy cities. We have those post-World War II starter homes that are
It's my entire city.
1,400 square feet, 1,800 square feet max. And that's not what's being built. Does that change for you?
No, because if that was where the demand was right now, if we had buyers going into builders saying, look, I want a brand new house and all I can afford is 1,200 square feet, and they were flooding those builders with requests for 1,200 square foot houses, builders would have been building 1,200 square foot houses. But that's not what they've come asking for. Or they've come asking and said, well, I want that 1,200 or 1,400 or 1,500 square foot house, but I'm thinking future, so I'd also like a basement. Well, now it's a 3,000 square foot house. And builders love to do that because they charge a whole lot more for that basement. And so they'll sell you on, get the basement in. And it's, I mean, I fight the problem because it's my day job has me selling homes and representing builders and inspecting homes. And I've seen quality just decline in what our builders are building. I toured a home this morning and it just shocked me from a quality builder to where the quality's gone. And it's pain. It's 100% trying to find a way to cut costs. And so we're building, and if we take that to a lower level, we're going to build blight. We're going to build garbage in the name of, this is awesome. Well, 50 years ago or 70 years ago, World War II, when we built all of Clearfield in the 40s and 50s, they were brick homes. They were solid. They were going to last and stand the test of time. You couldn't build that house now into any sort of affordable range to build in brick that would stand the test of time. You're gonna build stick and you're gonna build aluminum or vinyl siding on them to keep them at a price point, and they will not last. We will create absolutely terrible areas. And if you're packing them together, you're really creating just, we talk about zoning and how zoning initially started to segregate. That's exactly what we're doing. We are going to segregate people by blocks of, here's 10 acres, let's build 10,000, 4,000 square foot lots on 10 acres of land. And we'll build this massive community of low end stuff in the name of, we need this. And what happens in the future? Well, values go up again and Those are unaffordable all of a sudden, just like our 1940s and 50s homes are right now. They're still unaffordable. We had them go from 125,000 when I bought my house to a $450,000 price range now. And I couldn't, most kids
6
couldn't
years.
afford my house and so what do you do? It's that market, and market has adjusted itself time and time and time again over history. It's not a government solved problem. And we're gonna try to solve it, and we keep trying to solve it. And when you say ADUs didn't solve it, well, because no one was demanding ADUs, they already had them in their basements. I mean, they were renting out their houses already. They just don't want to go to the city now and tell them that, oh yeah, by the way, I gotta do this, because now I'd have to pay a fee and other stuff. And so it's more of a, I'll wait until the city catches me and brings it to my attention. And when they do, then I'll deal with it at that point. Sorry.
No, you're great. He just has a couple more minutes.
Yes.
That was a great question and great answer and dialogue.
Thank you.
Let's go ahead and with one more question before he has to leave.
I didn't mean to dominate that.
Mayor Walker?
As an elected official, as a mayor, I never ran for office with the concept that I would run a housing department. Now, some cities have them. We don't. I don't want one. I think most of you would probably agree you don't want one. Those that have them, I mean, it's not a revenue source for us. I sometimes feel like I've taken economics and I've degree in accounting, but I wonder if anyone else did, because I'm with Mark on this concept of when we say we as the government, we don't do anything. We don't do anything efficient. We don't do anything really well. I mean, I can't think of something, if I was building homes for Draper City, if we were doing it, you can only imagine. But my issues are two. The always in this attack by the development community against us, the cities. And there are some cities that haven't done their job. They're anecdotal. Most of us have done our bit for King of Country. I got apartments, I got it all. Every time, it's the same attack. Impact fees. Both. Impact fees, we use them for stuff that the community wants. Take away the impact fee, we're gonna raise property tax, because we gotta pay for the cops. We gotta pay for all the stuff that it impacts. But it's always an impact fee. That's the problem. So if you got rid of impact fees, then this problem is solved. All these developers want is the ability to build whatever they want, wherever they want, however they want. And I always say it, the housing crisis is most acute where Builder X has 3 acres. It just is. If you have 3 acres and you can't build what you want, it's a freaking housing crisis. And that's when they go to the legislature and say, well, Draper City won't let us build apartments right next to this half acre, in the middle of this half acre neighborhood. We're bad guys because of that, which we got apartments all the time, unlimited height zones, and we talked about this before. I do an unlimited zone, and the developer builds a 5-story building. That same developer comes to the middle of my community, wants to build that apartment complex over there. When we tell them no, we're the bad guys, and that's the issue. We're forgetting that all the time, because we're not, I don't think most of us are trying to stop it, but there's areas where people expect to have a 1/4 acre single family home. That's what they bought. Condos are great. I'd like them. No one will build a condo. No one will build a town. We've asked them, we've said, hey, are you gonna make these owned, or are they gonna be for rent? Well, they're always for rent. I mean, Riverton has one where they built an entire 300 and something subdivision, gated it. And the builder, the church, rented the whole thing. So what do you do about that? That's the other thing. It's not all, I just get frustrated. They want to take impact fees and they always just want to be able to build whatever they want, wherever they want. And that'll fix it. And it won't, because that area that I've talked to you about in Draper where they want to build apartments, well, now we did a development agreement. The starting price of a 4,000 square foot lot in that subdivision, 1.3 million. Because they're going to build a 3,600 square foot house, basement, middle level, top. That's all I'm saying. Is I think as we look at this problem, I think we cities would like to come up with a zoning proposal that works, but I'd like to see them capped. If the government's going to make this market, then let's make it. It's 1,500 square feet. It has to be built out of brick. I mean, if we're going to drive the market, let's drive a market that at least achieve something. But I don't know if the development committee is going to want to do that, because I don't think they will. But if you want to, and I hate this term starter home, because if I drive around, most Utahns aren't going to live in any other home other than that one home they buy. That's the way it is right now. People get a home, that's their home, because none of them are for sale. So I think we should stop saying that term, frankly. I think we should just say, a first home, affordable
I
home.
like first home.
Because, our kids, our generation, my sons have never said, Dad, I want a half acre like you did, and I want to take care of the yard for my whole life. My kids are like, I want a condo that I can own, and I don't know that this generation, we could build 30,000 of these homes, and then like the apartments are already having high vacancies, because remember it was a crisis, but you were there when we need all these apartments, we got them. Now we got, vacancies. I just think this problem's gotta be, I hate how we always try to solve it every single session. Why don't we spend 4 sessions and really look at it or implement it slowly, because we just continue to come at us. It's the same stuff, by right zone, nowhere impact fees, it's just the same. And I tell you, your constituents, not yours anymore, but our constituents and the legislators' constituents, they're getting sick of it.
They should elect different legislators about to.
But at the same time, I still got kids living with me, so I get it. I want to, so I think we're here to work on some type of problem, but I think we're fooling ourselves and we think we can, all of us solve it by just jumping into the systems and just giving the developer whatever zoning they think they want today. They'll bank it until it makes sense and then they'll go build whatever they want. And that one proposal, if it's less than half the median home price,
Yeah.
in Draper, that's about 700,000.
Yeah.
So $699,995.
Yeah.
And you're getting the
start
starter
first home.
or a first home.
Yeah.
Or I'm saying the start of my.
Yeah, I didn't say
That's
much.
your fault.
To my point, yes.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you, and you're gonna get some questions from Cam. One may be that I would just be curious as a poll question, if you'd ask your membership, Cam's leadership here is there a tool for municipalities to right now require ownership?
No,
No,
I don't think there's a tool. I don't.
fair
know-
housing will prevent that.
What's that?
Fair housing prevents
Fair
that.
housing prevents that, okay, because I know there's a county that just required 60% ownership in a deal that they just did, and I was like, whoa, you did? I said, can you do that? I said, "You really know what we did?"
They can do anything they want until they get sued.
That's right.
Steve, I want to thank you for coming again. Thank the governor for joining us today. I mean, I basically talk daily with Steve and have since
Yeah.
December, but even before he took this position, we were chatting on a regular basis because I appreciated his perspective and would often call him and say, well, what about this? What about that? So now that he's in this role, the governor said it repeatedly that Steve was the one name that those on the development side and on the local government side could agree was a fair broker, and Steve's always demonstrated that. So thank you for joining us today. We do have Slido questions to help us figure out ours.
Seems like you got some-
And I will be sharing those results with Steve. So if any,
Cam does make.
great, thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Yeah, we'll be in touch tomorrow. Mayor Kafouzi, if it's all right, let's just keep
Yep.
going down this advocacy space because I think we've set up where we're at. And the legislative preview beforehand, we more or less walked you through, Nick, can you go back to the PowerPoint? We walked you through the board principles that you adopted back in December, and here's what we hope to do in the next few minutes or so. Dun-dun-dun-dun. Yeah, well, keep going, Nick. I can't advance it from here, so. I think it's just it's important to have a quick refresh about moderate income housing plans. Because even as we look around this room, it's important to recognize that Mayor Monson in Blanding is not an MIHP city. His MIHP cities are 5,000 and above in urban areas, 10,000 and above off the Wasatch Front. So you're really talking about 83 of 255. So 2/3 of our members, when we talk about MIHP cities, that doesn't apply to 2/3 of the membership. Okay, so I think it's just important for people to contextualize that
Will you
as we-
notice that acronym? And
moderate income housing plans, yep. When we designed these a few years ago, it was designed with flexibility where the city basically says, here's our plan, and then you show how you're meeting your plan. But again, it only applies to 1/3 of the cities. The good news is 85% are in compliance right now. The other 15% are working through the cure, and there are 23 menu items the city can choose from. Some are mandatory, like station area plans for cities with transit, which was the bill Steve Waldrop ran when he was a legislator. The drawbacks with the MIHP structure, and you heard him reference potentially using MIHP structure the first times. The drawback is actually in its flexibility. Because one of the frustrations we've heard from many cities has been DWS's evaluation of these plans is subjective because Riverton's goalposts are different than Lehigh's goalposts, and then DWS is trying to interpret those goalposts, right? So what is success? The more prescriptive it is in code, the easier it is to evaluate. But then it takes away the flexibility of the locals to essentially choose your own adventure. But it does mean that Cameron City can say, we're gonna do this menu item, but we're just gonna do it for one area, like one subdivision in our city, and that could be compliant, whereas Proactive City is doing it in 30% of the city, and compliance looks the same. So when we hear from state leaders that some cities phoned in reports or it's incomplete, that's the context for it. So we wanted you to just have that context as we jump into these next options, and not all menu items have the same impact. Because again, there are 23 different menu items. So that being said, Nick, advance next slide, please. Okay. There are 8 principles that you adopted as a board. The grid that we showed during the legislative preview is at the end of these slides. The 5 things you have up here, Steve referenced the 37 bills related to housing. These are 5 of them. Ward is House Bill 306 that would apply everywhere in urban counties. So counties of first, second class, or cities of above 15,000. So it's not the MIHP definition. You have the Senator Fillmore concept. You have R1, which is Rumbling 1 from LPC the other day. You have R3, which is the Rumbling 3 from LPC the other day. And then R4, which is a new idea that came up yesterday afternoon. Okay. So what we're going to do is just quickly walk through, and then we've put in X's, checks, or question marks from our staff thoughts on whether or not the idea is currently outlined is consistent, inconsistent, or to be determined with the principle you adopted in December. Okay. So that first principle is avoid one size fits all state mandates. With the House Bill 306, Ward's bill, and Fillmore's bill, you could actually argue that they're not one size fits all because of it doesn't apply to every city, or in the case of the Fillmore piece, it's a percentage. The R1 definitely applies everywhere, treats everybody the exact same. R3, percentage residential areas, that it's depending on the definition, could be one size fits all, could not be. And then R4, that concept is a pretty simple concept, just all residential zoning in the states just increased by 4 units. So instead of the 8 units to the acre, 8 by 6, which is what that R1 is, it's just, if your current zoning in that spot is 6 units to the acre, it's now 10. Or if it's 2 units to the acre, it's now 6. It's a pretty simple concept. Next, Nick. Principle number 2, starter home should be defined broadly in type. This was something we talked about a lot back in December. The Ward bill is only focused on single family detached. The Senator Fillmore bill is 8 units to the acre, but with uniform setbacks, and it's silent on type at this point. But again, I want to emphasize, I've met with Senator Fillmore twice in the last 24 hours, and he's indicated that he feels like the language that's in the bill that we have, which is not a public bill, he wants to get to consensus. So what's on there now is more of a starting point rather than a destination. R1, the Rumbling 1, that's again 8 units to the acre in all residential zones in the state, from Blanding to Bountiful, as long as 6 are deed restricted. R3 would be single family detached, townhome, duplex, or condo could all be part of whatever the percentage is. And then R4 is to be determined, because it would just be the bump. Next, Nick. So principle number 3, the path forward should result in defined first homes. This is kind of a tricky one in this way, because both the Ward proposal he wants to have some sort of deed restriction on AMI. The Fillmore current language wants the builders to comply with some municipal regs, and wants it as, he's open to what needs to happen to make sure it's actually first homes. R1 would be deed restrictions on 75%, but still to be determined what those deed restrictions would be. The discussion's been around either $450,000 or $450,000 or an AMI cap. R3 is to be determined on how, again, if the city stretches on one side, how the developer stretches on the other side around unit size or precluding short-term rentals or letting cities do inclusionary zoning. R4, again, it's just a +4.
Ask you a question.
Um,
So we were in a city council meeting and we talked about deed restrictions and our staff attorney said, yeah, we are not allowed to do deed restrictions. They're against the law. So would these be part of the law that would allow
Mhm.
deed restrictions to be in play for those specific things? So state law would change and now it's allowed?
good question, because your attorney's right, that in your base zoning, you cannot require deed restricted units for a certain price point. That's state law. The discussion has been, basically, if the cities stretch on the zoning, would we then be able to require the deed restriction? So that's how you make both sides stretch. As Mayor Walker pointed out, someone has to administer those. And, we told you we were going to share with you some of the LPC results from last week, and that was actually one of the key questions we asked. And interestingly, the majority of the LPC responses last week on the deed restriction question, the majority of LPC respondents said they were open to deed restrictions so long as the state managed it rather than the state or a third party rather than the city. So they're open to this discussion, but the city didn't, most of our members said they felt ill-equipped to manage those deed restrictions.
So would the city impose those deed restrictions when we approve the subdivision?
Yeah, that's how it would have to work, is the deed restriction is done upfront as part of the zone change. Now, then the question is, does the state mandate the zone change or does the city do the zone change? And I'm going to come back to a Slido question on that exact piece. Principle 4. Principle 4 is the requirements on us. So we just talked about the requirements on builders. What would be the requirements on us? You can see in the ward proposal, to every residential lot and state reduced impact fees. The Fillmore proposal, again, he told me this morning that it's a starting point, like he doesn't want cities to be unreasonable in our setbacks, but he recognizes that uniform setbacks with the same setback in every lot everywhere in the state is probably a step too far. And then R1 is just simply, it's 75%, kind of make it work. R3, I think this is the questions to still work through. Nick, will you go down to principle 5? We were putting these together late last night, but we share this with you not because we expect you to memorize everything on the chart, but just to give you a sense of how we're trying to use the principles you adopted to go through each proposal to figure out where it makes sense for us to engage and where it doesn't. So this is about the infrastructure challenge. Obviously, if you reduce our impact fees, that worsens infrastructure. Most of the proposals are pretty quiet on infrastructure right now. Nick, number 6. Don't punish for cities for things outside of our control. By definition, preemption is punishing cities for things outside of our control. The R3 concept, where the state essentially says a certain percentage of your city, that's not a preemption, it's direction, and then the city figures out where it makes sense to do it. That's not a preemption. That's not a preemption in the same way that the others would be. Nick, number 7. This gets to if all cities are involved in planning for first homes, is that a simple percentage? Is it a sliding scale? And all the proposals in some form or fashion would require all cities to be involved in some way. And then principle 8. Principle 8, this is what consequences apply if a city refuses to play ball. What Senator Fillmore reiterated this morning was he wants more teeth beyond what we negotiated last year as part of MIHP, but he doesn't know what that is. But his point is, I think his exact words to me this morning were, quote, I think most cities want to be part of the solution. Most cities want to do what they can with their authority. But for those handful of cities that refuse to play ball, there's got to be some sort of consequence. Whether we agree or disagree with that, we'll get to in a second. Okay, and then you can see with R3, the discussion's been around just using this moderate income housing plan compliance model, which is why I started by referencing them. Okay, Nick, next slide. So this is what we presented to the legislative preview. Again, try to give you a snapshot. Like none of the ideas out there right now check all the boxes. There's a lot more red being of concern in some of them. Some green is they're consistent with the principles, and then the gray is still to be determined, right? Like there's still questions to answer. Okay, Nick, next slide. So we have not shared these with the broader membership. You're the first ones to see them. We asked at LPC last Monday. Back then, we were just talking about rumbling 1, 2, and 3 of the comfort level from the membership around those 3. Rumbling 2 is kind of disappeared for now. Rumbling 1 is what I was describing a second ago, which is 8 units to the acre in all residential zones in the state, from Blanding to Bountiful. I'm kind of on a alliteration kick here.
I know, I'm appreciating this, that the world is really just contained between Blanding and Bountiful.
Yeah, I'm looking around the room to see if there's another alliteration I can do.
Blanding, back to Bountiful.
There you go.
It's
I
appropriate.
could say Spanish Fork to Salt Lake as well, but it doesn't roll the same way. So with rumbling 1, this is the 8 units to the acre, 6 of which are deed restricted at a price point. And you can see red and yellow is very concerned or somewhat concerned. You can see the strong majority of LPC members were very concerned. We'll skip rumbling 2. Rumbling 3 is what we were just describing a second ago, that the state says you have to plan for a certain amount of, or zone for a certain amount of smaller lots, townhomes, etc. That facilitates first home. In exchange, developers have to meet certain criteria. The LPC results were more favorable. So if you add the concerned and you add the comfortable, the concerned piece gets to 31%. The somewhat or very comfortable is at 54%. But of course, the caveat being somewhat comfortable is by far the biggest because the details matter. But we just give this to you because we're going to ask you some Slido questions here in a second, because we're trying to figure out, okay, if the majority of our members are comfortable enough to engage in this rumbling 3 space, then authorize us to engage in the dialogue around the rumbling 3 space. To date, we've just been gathering the different ideas because we didn't want to get out in front of the membership. Councilmember.
So we're talking, last year it was a lot of the moderate income housing space, which was based on your city population size and what the requirements were there. We're just barely getting to where we are looking at compliance. Now we're totally shifting and saying, now it's based on county size. So what happens to the cities in between that aren't moderate income size yet, and yet live in a county that this would require a new set of rules? And so I don't see where the integration of these two different ideas are coming together in the name of housing.
Yeah, it's one of the frustrations we've had all year is that we never seem to let policy concepts breathe before it's on to the next policy concept.
Right.
And the Woodland Hills of the world are in a really interesting spot because you're not MIHB, because you're below 5,000. When you grow to 5,000, then you overnight become MIHB. Representative Ward's proposal as drafted would apply to Woodland Hills, whereas MIHB doesn't.
Right, and so if one is passed, but the other one is still there, then that seems to be conflicting state policy, right? And so you're in compliance with one, but you're not in the other, and so you do have to change all of your ordinances to be in compliance of one, even though the other one isn't required. That seems.
So, no, it's a very fair point. So Nick, we'll go to the next slide here, because part of the discussion around rumbling 3, and you heard Steve reference it, of using the MIHB framework
Yeah.
is to try to almost focus the MIHB framework more on affordable homeownership. Because right now the MIHB framework is on moderate income housing generally. And we have seen an onslaught of apartments in recent years, but you haven't seen the onslaught of affordable homeownership. So is there a way to focus part of MIHB toward affordable homeownership? And that's the stretch piece from the city side. And then is MIHB the right universe, or does it need to be a different universe? So the concept around this rumbling 3 is every MIHB city zones for at least, or zones for X percent. We put 20% in for conversation purposes, but the percentage has been all over the map. But you zone for percentage that allow for lots smaller, that could include, I shouldn't say starter homes, Mary Walker, I should say facilitate housing, or affordable home ownership. But it does lead to questions about built out cities and what that looks like. Nick, go to the next slide. So here's how this could potentially look. So here's city, actually, Nick, will you skip ahead to, okay, this is actually city B. So it says city A in the bullet points. It should actually be, this is city B. This would be your baseline city. So you apply the state overlay to the minimum 20% of the residential areas. What we need to discuss here as a board in the next minute or so of what does that look like in a built out city versus a greenfield city? But then ideally those city actions count towards MIHP. So you're kind of trying to solve two pieces at once. Will you go to the next slide, Nick? On city C, this would be Cameron City. You'd often hear me use city C. Cameron City is the bad city. So if Cameron City chooses not to comply with this new requirement, then these are the current consequences within MIHP. And when we asked the LPC about consequences, the majority of LPC respondents told us they were comfortable with MIHP consequences because we think they're significant. There's state transportation money, there's the county imposed fifth, and there's the Olin Walker fee that cities will have to start paying. So the concept would be, you have the cities would have to stretch to identify a certain percentage of your city, but a lot of cities are doing that now already. And for the cities who aren't doing that, it's a big stretch, but you can tie it in with MIHP. Let me pause there because we have some Slido questions we want to talk through to kind of spur. We know we've hit you with a lot here. We're trying to really focus on this rumbling 3 to see if there is a path forward here to engage on. Mayor Walker, did you have your hand up?
No.
Okay. The questions about what this rumbling 3, there are questions about the context of, we're going to slide on a second, what you think about the actual policy concept, but just any clarifying questions.
What is it again?
So Nick, we'll
Like some.
go back to the previous slide,
summarize
Nick.
quick.
Yeah, no, city B, right
There's
there.
too much rumbling in my head.
Yep, so the state would set the objective of, say, 20% of your residential areas need to allow for smaller lots, townhomes, et cetera.
In that rumbling 3, did we talk about capping the size of the building?
Right, so then there would be some sort of restriction on the other side where we could say you have to meet certain design standards or size
And it could
standards
include
or ownership.
condos or townhomes.
Right.
So a session ago, just go back one session. If you would have said, we're gonna tell somebody that built some homes, what they can do with them, whether they can rent them or they have to sell them, it'd have been heresy, right? I mean, can you imagine if you would to tell some developer who built 10 homes and wanted to rent them, you can't do it?
Yeah.
A session ago, it would have been cities again causing the problem because we don't.
It's kind of mind-boggling, yeah. Yeah,
Now we're okay telling them, you gotta sell it to somebody for this price.
potentially, that's what we're about to ask you.
We're gonna make the market, let's make it.
But that's what we're about to ask you here, is we're trying to figure like, what is our sandbox? Steve mentioned ideas out there, so again, this rumbling 3 would be the state would make us stretch by saying you have to apply this to X% of your residential areas, 20%, whatever the case may be. But then in some sort of exchange would be, you could regulate house size for some of them, or deed restrict some of them. Like, at this point, don't focus on the percentage, but just that it's that concept of it's not a state up zone. There's a percentage of your city and you as a city figure out where that goes, but in exchange, then you can regulate certain things to try to get the outcomes.
Things I'm not seeing in rumbling 3, I don't see controls around developers. So I see requirements on cities. I don't know if I see teeth yet on cities, but I see maybe those will be the penalties that already exist for MIH, but I don't see any teeth related to how we will ensure the developers also have teeth to do these things. I'm also I'm uncomfortable with the idea of a percentage because I think we end up picking hard winners and losers within our own cities. You know, I know that this was the standard we adopted for ADUs and I hated it then and I hate it 3 years later. Because you're pitting your residents against each other, on which side of town you must hate the most, because that's where you're gonna designate the percentage to be. So, I personally don't love, you know, whether it's 15% or 20 or 50%. I think that, is a divider in a community. But I do think if we haven't adopted a principle that says that developers need teeth too, I need to see that.
That is,
in their metric.
yeah, that is principle number 3. Path forward should result in defined first homes. That's the requirements on builders.
I have 2 questions. Is it possible instead of a percentage to negotiate an overall zone that we could have some uniform zone about affordable houses? But then the developer could, if they found, you know, to your point, if they found some 3 acres or whatever it is, they could then take that zone and go apply it. As opposed to, I mean, it's sort of what they're talking about, but with all the caps on it, I mean, like, it's gotta be a certain size building. I guess we're gonna set the price. If we're setting the price, who's gonna pay the bill? Is Draper City writing the check to the developer to make that mortgage 450? Is the great state of Utah gonna write that check? Or is the developer gonna write the check? I think costs, like Mark says, to the point where it's a tent, with the, you know what I mean? I mean, who's gonna write the check to make it 450? Can we add, is that part of 3? How are we fitting that in there? Because someone's gonna have to write a check. Either it's the governor, or the legislature, or
Sure,
all
sure.
the cities. I mean,
Yeah, great questions.
or the
So-
developer does it on his own, right? Or on their own.
Yep, great questions. On the first piece of the city creating a city overlay zone that doesn't have a percentage requirement. I think the response back from other stakeholders will be if there's not any sort of percentage requirement or any sort of by right thing, then their point will be it'll never get used. Now, I disagree with that because we have a great example in Washington Terrace right now, where Washington Terrace has created a infill ordinance that developers can apply for, and they are using that to fill in some of the empty lots within the city, and they're actually filling in empty lots in single family neighborhoods with more affordable homeownership product. And so it's worked pretty well for Washington Terrace.
Can I just have a clarifying question there? Is it an infill of a greenfield lot, or are they redeveloping existing
In the Washington Terrace piece, it
In the
applies to empty lots.
empty lots? So it's
Yeah.
the first movable lot from vacant to
That's right.
a housing zone.
Yep, that's right. That's right. But I think the pushback I know the pushback because that's actually where we started the conversation with Steve and the stakeholder group in December was cities are required to essentially create our own city overlay the developer could apply for, and it was a non-starter in those conversations. We could certainly revisit it with different provisions, but that was a non-starter with stakeholders. Let's jump to Slido, because I think the Slido is going to help flesh this out. While he pulls that up, the second question Mayor Walker asked of who's writing the check to bring down the cost. Like, this is the $1 million question, because you could get rid of zoning. True, you could get rid of zoning tomorrow, and it still doesn't mean that someone's going to build an affordable homeownership unit. The argument we've been hearing from developers has been, if we had the certainty around zoning and we knew we could get this done quickly, then that would bring down our costs and therefore bring down. Do you agree or disagree? That's the point that they've been making back to us. So the first Slido question, I'll give everybody, including those online, and chance to make sure you sign in here. Yeah, Nick, go ahead. You'll still be able to sign in on the next slide. So which of the policy frameworks do you prefer? Now, before you answer this, First option, the state just simply does the overlay. Increased density everywhere, and one of the arguments we've heard about why they like this idea is because it avoids local referendum. Because the state is just doing the upzone, so therefore no local referendum, because it'd have to be referred to the state level. The second option is another one that several state leaders have told us they like, where the state says the zoning overlay applies everywhere, but then the cities actually exempt areas. So Councilmember Bradshaw, it's actually the opposite of what you were describing, where you're exempting areas from the state overlay. And then the third option is really the rumbling three. The state sets the goal, but then allows the city to adopt the zoning about where that fits, recognizing that we're using 20% just for conversation purposes, but even at a 20%, a lot of cities already are zoning for these sort of outcomes. And in a way allows us to go back and say, look, we're doing this and the market's still not responding. It's market forces, it's not local regulation.
I think if we do that though, their first response will be, okay, so then it needs to be 50. We're making up the numbers, right?
Right.
But they're, well, that's not working then. I think your point would be to say, the market's not doing their job. We're creating a place, the soil on the ground for them, and they're not building it. Because I think we want to be careful.
I don't want to answer.
Well, that's the hard thing, that's the hard thing for me too, is
Where's the none of the?
I don't feel like this applies, it applies, but it doesn't apply, and I don't know.
Then how much can you exempt out? Is it a percentage? Option two, I
I
mean,
mean, right now it's just at a conceptual level,
Right.
right?
Does this, what about the cities like Mill Creek or Salt Lake
Yeah,
or Bountiful or Clearfield? Where they already have these, what were the affordable homes, but now aren't because then are for sale, not going to, which is a whole nother market. How do they get credit? Because it can't just be, that's my worry too, is that then you'll have maybe someone go in and buy 5 acres and destroy a bunch of viable affordable homes to build more expensive, affordable from when those folks bought them at 200 to affordable now at 700. I just see a dynamic that could, if they have the carte blanche overlay, maybe they'll, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean,
well, I think that's one of the biggest
do we get
concerns about
credit for
the
people
carte
that-
blanche overlay, and I think the rumbling three concept gives credit for those communities. Now, does it move the needle to help a Mill Creek or a Salt Lake get more affordable home ownership? I think that's one of the sticky unanswered questions right now. If we're blending Vermont, and I hear you loud and clear, like how does this help get affordable home ownership in Blanding or in Manton? Anywhere outside the urban areas? I don't have a good answer for that either. I really don't.
Give you an example. Last time we answered single family zone to commercial business, mixed use apartments and businesses. And then the single family zones, the developer already has by zone, we just passed the zoning for affordable housing initiative. You can take a single family zone and make it into 4 units as long as 50% of those units were affordable.
Mhm.
And I said, so we're gonna get some density and we get affordable housing if you just did that, and we don't have to be zoned into this commercial development. And he goes, well, it doesn't pencil. So I'm not gonna do it. So we're like, well.
Well, in a way, Councilor Dugan's example here, I mean, what rumbling three would basically allow us to do is say, see, it's not us,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Now, does it move the needle? That's a different question, but allows us to say like, we are stretching, but the market is the market,
Mark.
right?
Right.
Okay,
But
next,
the rumbling three doesn't say that existing, 8 units to the acre, whatever count. Like, I'm uncomfortable answering your survey, since our names are associated with the survey, when right now, I would probably push back on all of these as described.
no,
That's
well,
all.
that's fair. I've heard multiple people say that prefer the none of the above option. So I'm looking at this, I don't look at this and
Take the
say,
survey with that caveat.
yeah, I think that message has
I will put
resonated
Troy
loud and clear.
Walker Twice.
Yeah, no, I think that message has resonated loud and clear.
Yeah, can I go back and change my name on?
No, next one question. So this is actually also getting to that infill, greenfield piece. Because Councilmember Bradshaw brought this up on the percentage piece. If the state were to set a first home policy should it have the same minimum percentage in all cities and towns? The same minimum percentage in MIHP only? Or kind of a minimum percentage in MIHP, but higher percentage in Greenfield than in build out cities? Like, we get asked this question literally every hour. And we also raise the issue of how do any of these proposals actually help an infill city get more affordable home ownership? So that's why we want your thoughts of like, which of these makes the most sense?
I have a question about that though. Is South Jordan considered a city with greenfield? Because every inch of greenfield has been entitled,
Yeah.
including the new annexation into
Sure.
our city. So I'm wondering where we fall with that, you know?
Yeah, so we have brought that point up too, is that even a city that has a lot of empty ground doesn't actually have
It's not like
greenfield.
it isn't,
Yeah.
right? It's not.
I mean, that just gets back to the one size fits all, because,
Yeah.
I mean, to try to characterize cities like that is, I mean, especially when you don't hit them and say, oh, this is an incorporated boundary, but it's not developed yet. Oh, but it's already been entitled. Yeah,
These policies.
I don't know how you would
It's
ever.
just, you know?
Yeah, so the conversation I had this morning with the legislators was basically this top question, like a sliding scale, depending on your type of community. And again, I don't necessarily know how to do the sliding scale. It's why we want to just ask the conceptual question here of, does it make sense to try to figure out a sliding scale, or is it better to have just, if we go down this route, this is really interesting, that the sliding scale makes more sense, and don't know what that necessarily looks like. Well, we are meeting with our strike team tomorrow morning to talk through your general direction here and to figure out with the strike team, is there a way to put meat on the bones based on your direction or not?
Still expressing general discomfort.
No. Okay, yeah, no, yep, no, hear that loud and clear. Next one, Nick and Carson. Okay, so if they set the first home policy, which of the items should it consider? This, Councilmember Bradshaw and others have brought this up, and Mayor Walker, like, I think the credit for what is already entitled for, planned, or built. We also added this point on the census tracts of where you have naturally occurring affordable housing already. So if you could select all that apply here, hopefully this one's a little faster. We could have just done all of the above, but.
We need to report back to the governor that we are stretching in this room right now, right? This is.
We got 100% on all 4 questions.
No, and this is helpful, right? Like, we are asked every day, can the league live with this? Can the league live with that? And it's these types of questions, and so that's why we're,
Walter was still here for that.
oh, he'll see these.
No,
Well,
but to just feel. it's-
we'll build attention. Yeah,
But how can, wait, can it, existing plan for single family detached, where you change the.
I haven't heard condos. been out.
I think it moved, the bar moved to a different spot. Like, I mean, anyone else received any text messages from developers while we've been taking
Me.
these polls?
several.
So have I.
Yeah.
And I just think it's really interesting that I've been asked to meet about project in my city.
Yeah, yeah, probably about 10 text messages thus far there.
I don't know that yours are the same text messages I'm receiving. Mine are in my elect.
Yeah, like,
That's really
right,
not like, hey, when are you coming back to the Capitol?
yeah. Okay, let's go next one. Okay, so this gets back to, like, if we were at a point where a percentage of the city had to be zoned to allow these types of units, like, what tools do we need? Some of which are already preempted in state law in order to ensure affordable home ownership. There's another one, all that apply, so make it easier to regulate short-term rentals. allow us to require that a portion of new units be small. So Mayor Walker, that's your point, or deed restricted. Building design, right now, we're preempted at regulating color or the cladding or the architectural style. And we put in parentheses here, the form-based duplex. So, you know, you're all familiar with the term missing middle. Well, right now, it's hard for you in your zoning code to allow for a duplex that looks like a traditional single-family unit because of the existing state preemptions on design standards. So being able to, you know, loosen some of those preemptions, make it easier to say, okay, you know, this house can look like a single-family unit, but have 2 units in it, fits into the neighborhood. You know, we can plan for that. Right now, again, it's difficult under the current state law.
From
That was with
not
the,
80%.
we were using the
Or
same, we
100.
were just using the same number for everything for, because
So-
we were told last meeting that if we just used X%, people couldn't visualize what X% meant. So we just picked a number and kept it consistent. So 20% stretch on us, 20% stretch on developers.
I think it's enough. I mean, I just, if we're going to be, if it's going to be pushed upon us that we do small lots, and that this is the solution, then small homes has to be the other side of that. If it is not, we have given and we will get small lots and big houses.
And that's, and we can show that that's what's happening.
Yes, because it's already, that's a proven point already. If we cut down and we say, you know what, we will agree, we're gonna go back and we're gonna allow and this is, we're gonna put X percentage of our cities and they're gonna be small lots. Well, they damn well all better be small homes too then. And the problem is, the builders are gonna fight back on that because it's not what they want to build.
It's not what the market wants.
That's not what's asked, that's not what the market's asking for.
I have a question, Dan, if you don't mind. So Salt Lake City enacted a zoning ordinance to allow more density, basically in all zones. And I know that that was coupled with some design guidelines. Are those set up through a development agreement, or how did you
No, so
accomplish that?
design requirements are that, so you take a single family zone lot. And now you make it a fourplex, it's still, it's limited to 40% of the zone being covered by the primary unit. So it can't be any bigger than a single family home at that 40%. So say that you've got a 5,000 square foot house, you know, 40% of that is 2,000 square feet, right, of land to be the house, whether it's a single family home or a fourplex, threeplex, twoplex, it still is only 40%. So that would be 4 small units on that same lot.
Are you trying to
So we're trying to
enforce design guidelines through a development agreement to make, I mean, so like, you know, we've seen the speakers and talk about these like mansion homes that it looks like a single family house, but it's a triplex. So are you trying to do that? Does your ordinance try to?
Would allow that, but doesn't require it. You can still
Okay.
you can still put a row of 4 units if your lot was so configured that there was enough place to have each one had to have a individual off-street parking also. So that requirement's there, but it doesn't make the house any bigger. You know, the units, if it's a fourplex, it'd have to be small. And that's, we're trying to get to the affordable side of that equation.
And you've done that, but it doesn't pencil.
That's what one of the developers said. This is we just enacted the ordinance, and this is the first zoning that the rezone request went in before the ordinance was passed, and so that I asked a question, said, so what if you do this? He goes, well, that's. And this is, now, I'm not talking about the one side of town, I'm talking about a side of the town where land prices and house prices are well above everybody else. So they're on the high end already.
Last Slido question, Carson, Nick. The painful exercise is actually super helpful for us because, again, we're getting asked these questions and we can go back and say, this is where our board is at. Now, what are we willing to do /accept in exchange for the guaranteed outcome of more affordable home ownership? So this is kind of the overall summary, and you can select all that apply or choose not to accept any. True, but you can just not respond, right? I mean, that gets the point across.
Does one mean if you do by right zoning, there's no other attachments to it, there's no other requirements, it's just by right zoning?
We only have so much space in Slido, right? And so what we were trying to get to is by right, basically by right in all areas everywhere. By right in all residential areas and just some cities like MIHP. There would be there is no way they're gonna run a bill that just upzones without any sort of tie back to affordable homeownership. It's just a matter of what that looks like. And even then, like, we may say like, that's still unacceptable to us to have any sort of state upzone.
What are their proposed setbacks and building footprints?
Yeah, so there are a couple of different ideas that have floated around out there. There's been, well, in fact, I'll pull up one of them that I've got right here.
They guarantee outcome. That's another point.
So real quick, before I get to that, on the setback piece, some of the language we've seen has been, front or street side building no greater than 10 feet from sidewalk edge or 20 feet from street edge, building setback no greater than 3 feet per side yard, rear yard, no open space greater than 40%, et cetera, et cetera. So really trying to have uniform standards. And Mayor Silvestrini will remember that this was a key fight during the Commission on Housing Affordability over the last few months, that we fought off getting any sort of recommendation from the Commission on Housing Affordability on uniform setbacks around the state.
Well, I mean, the problem with uniform setbacks is, first of all, I can imagine it turning into townhomes where there's no access to utilities and back lots and things like that. But even beyond that, it doesn't consider terrain. It doesn't consider all kinds of things that are going to affect those setback requirements or what's logical, or I mean, that it's really hard to do a one size fits all on that. I think just because of infrastructure and terrain.
Yep.
Well, setbacks are usually set on mass of home, right? So it's set on the mass of the home, the size of the home. I mean, you got a large home, you need a larger setback.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's normally how that works, right? If you have a big lot, you have bigger setbacks. But there are arguments where you gotta get, it depends on the density too. You have to have some setbacks in order to get.
Or if you have a apartment building complex next to a single family zone lot, maybe you have to have different.
Yeah.
setbacks.
Right.
Yeah, most of us.
I mean, you could have a 5-story building.
For there, even
setback, you can't do that.
Step back when you're up against a residential lot. And we have a lot of thin commercial strips in our city where, there's room to build something, but it backs up on a residential neighborhood. And people don't want that thing towering over them. And, nobody would want that. So, but there are also, hillside development things too, where those kinds of requirements make sense based upon other criteria. But I don't know. I mean, it's really hard to write something that.
Hillside development and topography have to be considered.
Yeah, that 30% slope matters.
So let me summarize. This has been really helpful because these are the exact questions we are getting on a daily basis. Here's where I'm going to try to summarize where we're at. There is, Seth, I'm going to use basically the way you described it. Like this has been a painful exercise. Basically, every question has required some sort of stretch, and there's still a lot of uncertainty about whether it results in affordable home ownership. I guess the key question I have for this group is, do we just walk into the Capitol tomorrow and report back to the powers that be that the answer is just no to any sort of proposal in this space, whether it's state preemption of zoning or state requirement of percentage, sliding scale, whatever, or is the Rumbling 3 framework, well, we're not ready to support it yet, we got enough favorable response with a lot of questions. Is it worth trying to answer those questions over the next few days? That's Mayor Kafusi, that's really where we're at, is we need to be able to tell people like, yep, we're at the table trying to figure something out, or the answer is just no.
The justification still has to be there for the outcome. I mean, because everything that I'm hearing from, each one of the proposals, there's no guarantee on an outcome. There's no even commitment to what that outcome is, that it's going to produce the result. And so for me as a mayor to say, yes, I would agree and I would back any part of this, I've got to know that there's going to be some sort of results. And we just heard it with ADUs and they shoved that down our throats. And we said, yeah, we can come to the table with this. And then have your results. It didn't do what they expected it to do because they really don't know what what it's going to cause. But I mean, I ran just quick numbers and ran Davis County. That's, when we're talking AMI, Davis County is $109,000. Well, if you run that 60% of or 70% of AMI, puts you at 72.5, which means that they can afford a $2,115 house payment. That puts them at $300,000. At that $300,000, take out the land now that we're gonna shift down and save them some money on their land. It's $262,000 for the house itself. That's assuming a $300,000 lot and 8 units on that acre. That puts them at about a 1,185 square foot house. So in order to make that affordable and fit within an AMI, we have to have a builder build a 1,200 square foot house, period.
So they have to be required to, or otherwise.
Yeah, and so
Just negotiate.
unless they do that, and unless we know that that's the outcome, how on earth do we support it? I mean, it's not doing what it's supposed to do if they can't get that outcome. And so, I mean, it's that conversation with the developers, the home builders themselves are saying, show me what you can build for $300,000, single family detached on a 1/10 of an acre, or a 6,000 square foot lot, or whatever that is. Tell me what you can build for this. Now I want to know, in that same thing, what is it on a smaller lot? You know, I mean, what do you get on a 1/5 of an acre, which is not an unusual piece right now? What kind of house and what kind of savings do you get then if we're dropping these down to 4,000 or 6,000 square foot lots? What's the difference in that? Because unless there's an outcome that we can truthfully lay our hats on and say, yeah, we are going to move the needle by doing this, then why are we doing it? I mean, there'd be no reason to even come to the table and try to support something, because all it means is that when it doesn't move the needle over the next year, we get the realtors and the home builders come back to us and say, see, you didn't give enough. That's the problem. You didn't get enough. And so now we're going to go for more. And next year's not an election year. And so next year we don't have legislators a little gun shy to pass aggressive legislation. And we get that coming back to us saying, oh, see, it's your fault. You didn't do it. We asked for this and it moved the needle.
The governor talked about making city stretch and making the development community stretch too. And I don't see any of this, and not even a mention of that. The development community stretch. Yeah. I mean, I know we're dealing with a private market, okay, and that may be difficult, but frankly, I mean, I guess other than the deed restriction as a percentage of some of these places being.
Well, and it's gonna go to
So
the same
real-
question. Where's their demand? Do they have the demand in that price range? Because if not,
Yeah.
they don't have the demand in that size of a house and that price range, that they're not gonna build it anyway. Which is what I've been hearing from the development community, is that's.
Unless the government
They're
pays
just
it.
gonna wait.
So, go ahead, Jenna, because Mayor Peterson has a comment online that I want to get to.
You want me to read that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Mayor Peterson online has entered into the chat. I agree, having to have justification for the outcome. And can we just let the existing policy changes, SB 174, play out before we implement radical changes? There's value in coming to the table, but I think at some point we have to draw a line in the sand.
No, it's an excellent point, and we've been pushing since the end of last session to let the policies that have passed in recent years play out. The MIHP has some shortcomings that are being used against us. And I think we do have some cities that are not zoning for a variety of housing types. That's being used against us. And I think there is some appetite by some legislators to let SB 174 play. In fact, Speaker Schultz has told us that he recognizes that there are recent years. And he's supportive of what we've done to date. And there are a lot of legislators, to Mayor Shepherd's point, in an election year that are not itching for a big fight. So I think those are all important things for us to consider. That being said, my experience at the Capitol has been that if you walk away from the table, then you better be prepared to shoot at everything that comes and recognize you may not get back at the table. So that's what we're trying to figure out is there the direction that I'm hearing from the board, and Mayor Kaufusi, I'm looking at you to make sure that we're encapsulating it, has been there's discomfort with every idea that's out there right now.
Because there's no teeth to the development.
Well, that's what I was getting
That's one of
into.
the
So
reasons.
that there's still a lot of uncertainty that any of these proposals will actually result in more affordable home ownership, that the builders will actually build those types of units.
Are the developers sitting around the table like this and answering those types of questions?
Yeah, Steve Waldrop has met with the realtors, he's met with the home builders, he's met with all of them, and what they're saying to him is, if you go forward with a ward type proposal, we can make that work and build that price point. And we're saying, no, they won't. And we're saying that's bad planning, it's bad for infrastructure, and we're making those arguments that have resonated. And so then they come back with, okay, well, if not our plan, then what? And if the answer is just, then nothing, great. If the answer is, then what? Is there enough in Rumbling 3 for us to
So
figure out the then what?
I would suggest this, Kim. Today is day 2 of the session. We have a short and fast session, but you and I both know that there are so many hours in the next 43 days.
Yep.
Rumbling 3 to me is not close enough to say that this is a decent starting point. I don't think we should walk away from the table, but Rumbling 3 is, if that is being pitched right now as our best path, it's not there. But luckily, we have 43 fun-filled days with many, many hours for them to somehow improve Rumbling 3. I think what I heard is universal, greater than just not comfortable, like if Rumbling 3 were drafted as a bill tomorrow, you would end up with the. That's what I heard. Now, I was sitting on this side and I'm only worried about the world from Bountiful to Blanding, so I don't.
How far south do you go with that?
I think that of the 5 on here, as you've outlined in the coloring and such, Rumbling 3 is the best.
Can you go back to the grid? Right?
Yeah,
The grid,
that's that.
It's the best of what we've got. I agree with what Kate said. It's not there yet, but I focused on this one. Is there a Rumbling 5? And is there a league, what if we drafted a bill that stretched us and that stretched the builders, what would that? And can we start a Rumbling 5? If there are 4 rumblings out there, why can't there be a 5th? And instead of being defensive, is there one that we can pitch to say, we're not walking away from the table, but here's where we are, and I don't want to negotiate against ourselves, but is there a rumbling?
I think by the end of the session, there'll be a Rumbling 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But I think your point is a great one. And I think actually that could be the board motion as what they have on the table now. All of these are unacceptable, but if we can figure out a Rumbling 5 that's consistent with our principles, where it's basically, green throughout, then we're willing to consider that. And maybe that's just the direction for today. So then we can walk into the meetings we have scheduled tomorrow and Friday where people are waiting for the feedback, say none of these are there yet. But and the reason they're not there yet are these reasons. But if we can address these reasons, then we're willing to consider what that Rumbling 5 looks like.
Yeah, you've not heard anybody that would say, we're walking away. I think we all, and not just the table, but we don't like this topic, we're not playing. Nobody's there. We're just not there with this.
Yeah.
John, how much of it is an educational component? Because it seems to me that once we started talking about the 190,000 entitled units, that perked up a little bit, you know, they were listening. And yet we're still getting proposals like this that really don't resonate with local government. Public sector restrictions with private sector capitalism are not meshing. And so how do we get to the point where even though they are public sector, they're looking at budgets as well. They're not seeing them the same as we do on the local level. How do we help them learn that integration of these mandates that they're putting? I mean, they're saying, oh, well, pick this 20%. It's all mandated. It's not just one or two things, it's all mandated. And so how do we help educate maybe as we go forward in those 43 days that we have left to really understand the restrictions that we have in place? And yet they're hearing from their lobbyists who have no restrictions, basically. They're not being stretched. They can sit and wait. They can say we have 190,000 lots entitled and they can sit and not build because they want to build what they want. That they think somebody is coming.
So our part of the great government housing program as cities is really the zoning. That's mostly all we get to negotiate. All the rest of the components, we don't have any control over. So if we're gonna, I mean, at some point, our constituents, their constituents need to understand what it means that your neighborhood is not your neighborhood because in order to do this big project, we're gonna just change zoning. Thing that matters the most to their constituents and ours. I mean, I want to stay at the table, but I think that's got to be part of the discussion because all we can give is some zoning.
Yeah.
Which we've given, which we've done. But if we just say, okay, go zone it, then like Mark said, we're not getting an outcome. There's no guaranteed outcome. It's got to have, if all we can give up zoning, how do I tell my kid, you're going to be able to buy a house because we capitulated on zoning and said, put it wherever you want, whenever you want.
Yeah.
How's that, that's what the part of it that needs to get more study and more discussion, because I just don't see how the math works. I mean,
And how do we maintain quality of life, which was your opening statement today? For all of us in our cities, what does that mean? Different things for different cities. And yet that is what our residents require of us, is to maintain our quality of life. We moved here for a reason. Whether it's they moved next to transit because that's where they live, they moved next to a university because of that, and moved next to industrial, or they moved into more of a rural area. There's a reason why people move where they want, where they live, and to have that mandated change in your quality of life, then it feels, for at least I hear, it feels unfair. I am the property owner, and yet I have no say in what happens on my own property or even adjacent to my property.
and Cam, to your point that you brought up earlier this year, the places where you can get 450, they're already doing it in those places, and they're not on the Wasatch Front necessarily, or a townhome next to the former landfill or whatever it is. But so we give up all our zoning, and they're gonna build those homes where they can build them anyway, but then they bank the zoning till the future. It's just a zoning bank for the future to then do whatever makes the most money. It's America, but I feel like we're making an economy for that. We have a small chunk to participate in, but it changes the dynamic of everything based upon this little special economy we're creating.
So Mayor Kaufusi,
And then my second point is this a government funded program? Or is it just going to be developers finding a way to do it under the economy? Or is it really our taxpayer dollars that are going to go to make it happen? I guess that's the question.
yeah, great question. So Mayor Kaufusi, it's 3:50. We do still need to have the dues discussion. We started 15 minutes late, so my request is people stay for 15 extra minutes so we can get to that. Justin, any final thoughts, since you and I have been in these meetings nonstop?
The only thing I would add on that is I agree we need to stay at the table. I agree with what Councilmember Bradshaw said, that we've got a lot of time left for discussions. And I think part of the discomfort with any individual piece is individual pieces don't tell us the whole story. We don't have a full baked proposal in front of us to say, I'm comfortable with this, if that, because we don't really have those parameters yet. So I think it's worth sitting at the table because there will be a time we can come back and say, are we comfortable with this? If we can do that, or if this, or we figure out a way for that guaranteed outcome. So I don't think we'll get comfortable, and I'm not saying we ever will, but I don't think we're gonna be able to even feel comfortable taking positions on certain things until we have a fuller picture of what a proposal looks like.
I think my last word still goes back to the opposition on this, whoever they be, calling us willfully ignorant. That we have no testicular fortitude to fight this, to stand up to our residents, that we need state cover. And stating that even though they understood that this was an election year and that they'd been told by leadership and others that there was really no political will to push this forward and to let's see what happened, that they were still going to step on the gas and go for the jugular. That right there just makes me want to fight more than anything else, and that's my own. I mean, that's the other side of my profession, you know, that's my day job, saying that this is the case. And to call me willfully ignorant, that I have no idea, that we as a board of directors, as league leadership, have no understanding of the market, that we've decided to be ignorant on our own, is offensive. And it's, yeah, it's not a give and take in this case, it's a demand, and it's a threat, and I don't play well with threats. It just doesn't, not my wheelhouse.
I'd like to express a concern about the chart. Obviously, our meetings are open meetings, the developers' meetings are not.
Mhm.
So we labor under a different standard.
Yep.
Maybe they should meet that standard. We've listed this chart, and I understand from simplicity's sake, this staff probably wanted to, you know, green is good and red is the stoplight, no. But we have a lot of green on Rumbling 3, but there's a lot of unknown in Rumbling 3.
Mhm.
And I worry that our chart will potentially get circulated, and because it's got so much green, it'll be used against us. And when I would say that the green ought to be just blank white, because we don't, it may be one size misfits all, because we don't know what the percentages are.
Yeah.
We don't know if existing affordable areas would count. We don't, like, there's so much unknown in Rumbling 3, row 1, that I'm uncomfortable that it's right now the color green.
No, it's a fair point, and you'll see a lot of those greens have TBD in them, because we have some details, but not all the
I'd like them
details.
to be yellow.
Yeah.
Or gray.
Or orange.
No, yep.
Or
Or gray, we've just kept
Or
them
gray.
gray. So with that being said, the message that we're hearing loud and clear from the board, and I know it's been a long discussion, but and a tough one, but it's helpful because we're the ones getting pulled into meetings and asking, can you live with this? Can you live with that? And now we can be able to go back and say, no, we can't live with these things for these reasons. But I also want to just make sure we're clear, and I would actually welcome a motion if the board saw fit to what Seth was saying about these five aren't there. But, you know, we've got the board principles. If a rumbling or a proposal came back that was consistent with the board principles, we would consider it. And these just aren't there yet. Because that at least allows us to go back in those meetings and say, we want to help achieve more affordable home ownership. We just don't think these get there.
So we gotta move on to the ratification of staff, right? Of what
Yeah,
action you need?
well,
Do you need
we don't have
a vote on motion or
we
nothing?
don't have a staff recommendation on any of these yet.
Okay.
So instead, what we were looking for from you in the discussion was you guys have provided. So what would be helpful is essentially the ratification of these five aren't there. We're open to what Seth described as Rumbling 5, that's more consistent with our principles. And it's day 2 of a 45-day session, so stay tuned.
Does everyone feel good about that?
Yeah.
So that,
I make a motion that we craft a Rumbling 5 with some of the Rumbling 3 criteria, but that gets us more in line with the guaranteed outcome. If we have to we have to give our only thing, which is zoning, then we gotta make sure that we can tell our residents, we're given, but, and then your kids are gonna have a house. I don't wanna give and then have, you know, an investor come build a bunch of big houses and rent them. That's my motion.
A lot.
Okay, a motion and a second.
I'll second that.
Okay, any discussion? All right, let's call it to a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed.
Aye-ish.
Nothing online. Okay,
That's the name of the new Parks and Rec sitcom is for public.
so the motion carries.
Perfect.
Where do you want to jump to?
Okay, no, again, we asked people to stick around a few minutes. Let's go back up to fiscal year 2025 membership dues. Again, you need to approve the dues before April. We have a board meeting scheduled in March, so you don't have to approve dues today if you're not prepared to do so. But we wanted to get them to you as early as possible in the budget cycle. Nick, I'll turn the time over to you to walk folks through the memo and how we responded to the feedback from the board in the last meeting.
Excellent. Let me just pull this up. Great, thank you, Cam. We have brought forward to you today two dues options based on the motion that was made in the December meeting. A little bit of background information. Property value has increased significantly. If we were to do nothing to our dues rates, we would have about a 12% overall dues increase for fiscal year 2025. We did not like the sound of that. So we suggested to bring the property valuation down because that is what is driving it. In our discussion in December, we talked about bringing that property valuation down, but also looking at ways that we can mitigate some of the impact on high growth communities. And the idea of caps was brought up there as well. And we did some research into that you'll find in the memo. We did not bring forward an option with caps based on some of the research we did on what would happen if we had caps instituted in fiscal year 2012. And you can see that in table 1 in your memo. That essentially it's compounded year over year because you can only go up 10%. And you'll see what a handful of, or just over a handful of communities, including established communities and high growth communities, what a 10% cap would mean now, where folks would be. And based on conversations we've had with other state leagues, that this was kind of a scary area to enter because it ends up putting the burden on certain on established communities as opposed to those who are growing. However, we did bring forward an option that would reduce the population rate as well as the property valuation rate that would help mitigate some of that of what part of your dues is brought to you from population. That is dues adjustment option number 2. So I'll start at adjustment option number 1. That brings the property valuation rate down enough that we would only have a 4.16% increase in the total collected of dues. That is only the property valuation that is adjusted there. In adjustment option number 2, you have a property valuation rate brought down to roughly equal what we collected in this current fiscal year, then also a population rate brought down from 0.22 to 0.2. In order to mitigate the high growth communities concerns. Now, these raise approximately a very close amount. We have in option number 1, just over $104,000 or a 4.16% increase. And in adjustment option 2 is just about $107,000 increase and 4.26%. The real question is the difference between these two of what dues factor we want to emphasize and what the makeup of our dues we want it to be. In adjustment option number 1, sales tax with it's tied to the ability to pay becomes the lead factor, followed by property at 37.5%, followed by property valuation, which is 35.5%. And then the population estimate makes up just over a quarter, 26%. Under adjustment option number 2, sales tax and property valuation are tied for the lead at about 38%. and the population factor, which is our smallest factor already, comes down even more to about 24%. Cam, is there anything, you can also see as a part of this, we have what it means under options 1 and 2 for every single community in real time right here. So you can see what that means for your community and the area you represent. Those are the facts around dues. Now, as Cam mentioned, we have these 2 options here before you today. We can adopt those options and we can get dues out as people are doing budgeting. We can also, if neither of these work for the board, we can get direction from you today to come back with additional options in March. And we would have to adopt something in March because we have to do it before our April meeting. Anything else you'd like to add there, Cam? Anything I'm missing on this?
The last thing I'll add is that we do not have a board meeting scheduled in the month of February because of the session. That said, twice during my time as executive director, we have held board meetings in February because of the big ticket items that were coming. So, Mayor Kaufusi, I was going to bring that up in the executive director report, but if because of all the focus on housing, land use and the like, if the board wanted to meet again later in the session, separate from LPC, we could do so. So that if, you could adopt dues if we held that meeting too, but we just need to do it by the March meeting.
Any questions? Okay, go ahead.
I appreciate staff coming up with these options. I think that they are definitely moving in the right direction. I personally like option 2 a little bit better. That does take into account the population growth. In my analysis of it, Laverton, is that how it's pronounced? That was the highest growth. On option number 1, it was over 45%. Option number 2 is at 44%. And followed by Bryce, which is closer to the 20%. The biggest reduction was Lake Point, which was about a 25 or 26% reduction. But all of those are small enough cities that it was, only like $1,000 increase or decrease and things like that. And so I was still a little bit concerned just because Saratoga Springs under option 2 is still at 13%, Eagle Mountain's at 11%. But most of the other cities like surrounding me that last year were in, double digits, 30% increase that I had a really hard time with. It isn't that extreme with this. And so I do appreciate staff looking at it. I definitely know with the 4-point increase compared to like a 12% on average. So that's my comments on it.
So you prefer option 2?
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments?
Can I ask you a question of Councilmember Kid? So personally, I had found the discussion in the memo compelling about it being helpful for a city's ability to pay to have a little more emphasis on sales tax. But I know you've been very much paying attention to this issue and wanting to make sure that cities that have been feeling a little bit of a pinch felt like we were addressing those concerns. So even though option 2 has some increase to the sales tax side of the equation, you're still comfortable with their ability to pay, knowing that it's got less of an emphasis on sales tax.
My understanding is it has more of one because the property value rate went down along with, the property valuation and the population rate went down. And so option 2 puts more of an emphasis on sales tax revenue, which I think is more important because fortunately in Riverton, we've had a new shopping center go in. And so I'm not even as concerned about my own specific city. I'm more concerned about the other cities in the southwest part of the valley, also in Utah County, that last year, I think Saratoga Springs was over 30%, and they do not have a lot of increase in sales tax revenue, even though their growth is going up. And so I think it should have more of an emphasis on sales tax revenue. And I feel like option 2 does that. That's my understanding.
To help add some context to that, if you look at the sales tax amount, which would be, I don't even know those numbers, but we draw from sales tax in both of these options is exactly the same. It is just how much of it's property versus population. And because we're not lowering property as much in option two, that's why those end up tied. Because we've taken that amount out of population. So they're tied for the lead, even though the lead factor in option one, yes, would be sales tax. The amount we'll be collecting from sales tax, exactly the same in both.
Madam Chair, I move we adopt option 2.
All right, in a second. All right, any discussion on the adoption of option 2 for RDs?
I just appreciate, Councilmember McKay's analysis and her talking through it. I appreciate all the work that the staff has done to put together a variety of options, and I like the way Tani really dug deep into that, and so I appreciate that.
All right, let's go ahead and call it to a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries.
Great, thank you.
Okay, we're almost there. Roger and Jared. You take,
I'm gonna take.
Roger.
Do this, I got double instead, my wife lives. We have adopted in the past informal policy when the league is asked to participate in legal proceedings from another city. Usually that's done as an amicus brief, which is when you file it under the court brief, the matter is on appeals. We've had, it's originated up in Salt Lake City. In the court case, we've had a few others. But we wanted to formalize that process, which is what that memo is. There are 3 possibilities for this, they could be asked their beef. Amicus is the most common. That's when an appeal we file. But in theory, we could be asked to intervene, file a motion for intervention in an actual trial case. That's very unlikely to ever be granted, but it could be done under rules of civil procedure. And there are some instances where we might be asked on our own to participate as some sort of a public administrative body. The goal here is putting all that down in some sort of a policy that basically articulates what we're already doing. But we don't want to have a situation where it appears that we're just being arbitrary, saying no to somebody and yes to somebody else. And that's the purpose of this. So in a nutshell, this creates, when we get a request from the city, a means of evaluating the request, convening a body to look at that, and then making a recommendation back to the board for a conclusion is, which is what we did on the reapportionment request that came to us from the legislature. Mayor Substreet chaired that. We said no. So in a nutshell, this is formalizing a process that we've informally had and putting it out. So we've got a process in place.
So this is an action item.
Yeah, we do have some requests pending. So we might.
How many requests do we get a year?
One.
Okay,
2.
I didn't think that it was too
No,
many.
this is to have a policy. So when it happens, we aren't just arbitrarily saying.
But we've had 2 entities reach out in the last couple of weeks with the possibility of making the request. So that's why we wanted to update the policy, so we were ready.
Do the requests fit like the general body of the?
They're getting sued by somebody or somebody's suing them, and they're usually a small place, and they ask, will you help in the lawsuit? And in effect, we got to be able to say yes or no. The truth of the matter is no. We didn't know answer at the trial level.
All right, so I'm looking for a motion to approve the updates to the amicus policy.
I'll make the motion.
For a second.
All right. We have a motion and a second for the discussion. Let's call it to a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed. Okay, the motion carries. We are going to bypass number 6. Sorry, Molly. And then we're going to jump right down to item number 8 and turn the time over to Cam.
I'll do this in 1 minute. The first action item we have is at the June Board of Directors meeting when we set the calendar. We didn't realize when we set the calendar that it lands on Juneteenth, and a lot of cities are closed on Juneteenth. So we just need a motion to move that up a week. Our recommendation is to move it to Monday, June 10th.
So moved.
Okay, I need a second. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Let's go ahead and any discussion on that? Moving it up a week.
All right, 17th to the 10th.
Yeah, we'll update the calendar invites, but
Yeah.
we just need that actual board action.
Great. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the
Okay.
motion carries.
Perfect.
The motion in the second. Motion second. Great.
Second is the league officers meet starting next week. We will be at staff meeting with the league officers twice a week during the session. Once with the governor's staff, once on our own, and then we have LPC on Monday. We meet with the city managers on Fridays. So there are a lot of touch points through the session. Mayor Kafusi and I were just chatting that rather than try to schedule a board meeting now, not knowing, when all the pieces will come together, we'll keep the board appraised through LPC and electronically, and then if necessary, we'll call a board meeting in February. That would really be focused on the housing stuff, but we'll discuss it at LPC along with all the other bills that we're working on. If any city in the room has any interest in the DEI bill, let us know. That bill's been in committee this afternoon and does affect cities. We've been reaching out to some of the cities who we know are affected by it. And there are a whole lot of other bills out there. We're already tracking over 100. And on Monday, we'll ask for ratification of staff recommendations, but we're still trying to fly through them as fast as possible. Thankfully, the session does end midnight on March 1st. National League of Cities will be March 11th through the 14th. Let us know if you're planning to be there. We are planning a Capitol tour with Congressman Curtis instead of doing the joint event where we all are at the Capitol Visitor Center and the delegation comes to us. We're planning to do that tour and then leave the meetings with members of Congress to individual cities because that was happening a lot anyway. So just let us know if you're coming. We'll still be doing the dinner. We'll still do the brunch, March 11th through the 14th. So we'll still do the brunch, we'll still do our dinner, and then we'll have a Capitol tour for the whole group. That's what we're working on. We're still going back and forth with Utah policy about getting submissions there. So, stay tuned for that. And then, last but not least, please make sure you're receiving the daily email. Justin, anything else you want to add on just advocacy in general?
No.
It's
Sweet.
fourth
In general, no.
Yeah. But already tracking over 100 bills. Yeah, exactly. So thank you for all your time today. It really has been productive and worthwhile. So thank you.
I want to thank the staff for making this day successful. I know that my youth council enjoyed it. I had some interesting conversations with them about housing, which was good. They're starting to get it about that themselves too. So it was good. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, with that, I need adjourn.
Yeah.
Second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.